Hello and welcome to this special cassette which is designed to supplement the written material provided for leaders at area meetings. What we're trying to do is to supply you with advice on how to prepare visitors for the Into the 80s visitation. This cassette isn't for use at visitor training meetings, but it will, I hope, help you in your understanding and preparation for those meetings. We'll also be trying to suggest answers to a few of the typical questions that you're bound to have thrown at you. So, on this side of the cassette, we're going to look at the whole idea of the Into the 80s programme and talk about commitment and giving. Well, let's begin by hearing the aims of Into the 80s. And this is the fourth in the Programme for Action series. The first looked at the financial crisis in the church, the second, our congregational life, the third, on being Christians today, and this is the fourth, all of which have been produced by the Joint Working Party, which came into being in 1977. The convener of the Joint Working Party is the Reverend John Patterson.
The whole forward movement of this, as the General Assembly report says, the aim of all this action should not simply be to enable the church to survive, but to equip and strengthen the church for mission. And now, having done this reappraisal, and many congregations having engaged on a period of training, we now are moving towards the aim, which is to equip and strengthen the church for mission. Now, many people have told us that there is one further element in this preparation which is needed, and that is a time of recommitment, a time of teaching once again on the meaning of commitment in all kinds of areas in church life. And this is what this next stage of the Programme for Action is about. It's recognizing that we're almost at the stage of the outreach. But before we enter into that stage, we want to spend this winter creating a situation where members of congregations might be visited by a team of people who have been training and preparing for this visitation, that having been visited they might be invited to reconsider their vows of membership, their level of giving, and all the rest that church membership means. That members might be invited to come to a service of commitment, perhaps sometime before this coming Christmas. And then in the months that follow that, engage in training activities concerned with recommitment and a whole area of recommitment in all aspects of church life and life in the world today. And then in the early part of 1981, asking Kirk Sessions to get down to seriously thinking how they're going to plan and prepare for this outreach, this reaching out into the community in the name of Christ in the 1981 period. Now, that may look as though the Programme for Action, which has been unfolding through the Joint Working Party, is coming to an end, but that is not really the intention of this at all. The intention is that, having created a programme which consists of re-examination, reappraisal, recommitment, and working towards outreach, we would hope that presbyteries and congregations within presbyteries should begin to establish this kind of rhythm in their congregational life, so that by using this program and coming into it at various places, there's no need for anyone to begin the program at the beginning. We can come into this program at any point. We would want to see a rhythm created in congregational life so that a congregation recognized that its main aim perhaps was to equip and strengthen its members for mission, that it would engage on outreach. Perhaps having engaged on outreach, it would then see the need for reappraisal. Having engaged in reappraisal, it may see the need for further training and a deepening of commitment, which in turn would lead to more outreach, which in turn, once again, might lead to more need for reappraisal and training. It's this kind of movement between recommitment and training and outreach that we hope in the Joint Working Party will be established through this Programme for Action. But the next stage, this year's stage, is visitation and recommitment.
The Reverend John Patterson, convener of the Joint Working Party. Well, with me is Bill Law, Secretary Depute of Stewardship and Budget, and a man with many years' experience of training visitors. Bill, can you outline what you hope to achieve with this tape?
Well, thanks, Ian. I think first I would like to address my remarks, if you don't mind, to the people who are doing the training of visitors, and that is the congregational leaders who will be listening to this tape. And I think I want to acknowledge right away that I have the easier task of the two of us, because I know how difficult it is to gather together visitors, recruit them and train them for this kind of visit. And I realise also that although elders may have carried out visits in the congregation for years, and not all elders will be visitors, and not all visitors will be elders, but at the same time this is a rather different kind of visit. But I believe that if you use the pattern suggested in the training material, modify it to suit your own situation, I think you'll find it's at least a lot easier than starting from scratch with a blank sheet of paper and trying to put together your own training program. Now, if you have your material to hand, fine, but I'll be referring in the course of the cassette to the leader's notes and the other material. So if you don't have it to hand, switch off the tape now and find it before you switch on again.
And that's the end of Band 1.
Now, what is the tape intended to achieve? Well, John Patterson has spoken about the broad aims of the programme and some of the detail of the whole programme for action. This is a training cassette, and for the purpose of training, I want to be much more specific. I hope that after studying the material and using this tape, you'll be able to do certain things. You'll be able to present the aims and objectives of the visitation. You'll be able to present in 10 minutes the 5 main points in the case for commitment. You'll be able to present in 10 minutes the financial facts, both nationally and locally, using visual aids. You should be able to show the potential of members' giving. Present in 10 minutes the methods proposed to carry out the programme. To answer the perhaps 6 questions that are most often raised in this kind of exercise. To list the help available to visitors and to present the main points in the technique of visiting. Now, I've indicated a time for most of the objectives. There is nothing rigid about this, but it does mean that when we're training others, there'll be a pattern to the programme and it will make the best use of the time available. Now, this might be a tape and do your first homework. I did suggest, you may recall, in the visitor's notes that you read pages 1 to 6 before starting the cassette. So if you get your notebook now and try and recall, without reference to the leader's notes, the main aims of the whole programme that John Patterson suggested and the 2 specific aims of the visitation. And on the next band of the tape we will begin to consider the content of training meeting number 1. Now, perhaps you could open your training notes at page 7. This is where we'll be considering the timetable. And I want to offer some suggestions for possible help in training your visitors. And I've set this out on pages 7 and 9 of the Training Guide for Leaders, Section 2. Now, both timetables would allow for adjustment to be possible in terms of the time available, and I have worked on the assumption that we can expect at least 2 evening training meetings. I think this is the minimum we need, lasting from, say, 7:30 to 9:30. And I'm not suggesting that this is the only way to carry out your training, but it seems to me that this would be the minimum we would require, and I know that this would be sufficient to make an effective training program. Now, on page 8, you will find the outline of the timetable number 1. And the aim in this timetable is to provide the visitors with information on why we're visiting and the response that we would hope for. In other words, timetable number 1 deals with why. And on page 9, you will find the timetable for meeting number 2. In this case, the aim is to deal with the method of carrying out the visit, or in other words, how to do the job. So let's go back to page 8, to timetable number 1, training meeting number 1, and think about the various sections of the timetable and how we can prepare ourselves for them. Let's begin right at the beginning by considering the opening prayers. Now, there is a prayer, a program prayer that's on the back of the leaflet into the 80s. And I would suggest that there would be an advantage in using the program prayer throughout the training meetings and throughout the program, indeed, in the congregation. The same theme can be used at the beginning of meetings, at the end of meetings. I think there's 2 reasons for doing this. First of all, it's a helpful prayer, and secondly, It's part of the program material, and we want to familiarise our visitors with it. And I would think the other important reason is that while the prayer is for all members, it's especially relevant for visitors. Listen. Gracious God and loving Father, the task you set before your people is a mighty one. The challenge that you issue to me is daunting. I admit my inadequacy, my hesitation, my reluctance, but I put my trust in all that you have done and promised through Jesus Christ, and I commit myself anew to him. I depend upon the power of your Spirit to carry me forward in my commitment. Therefore, guide and strengthen me in all my service through Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit. Now, as well as using the prayer to pray, consider using it in your opening devotions or closing devotions by commenting on the various points of the prayer. If you have a look at it, you'll see that it falls into four main areas: the size of the task, our feeling of inadequacy, our need for dependence on the power of the Spirit, and our plea for strength and guidance. Now, I want you to turn to page 4 now in the leader's notes. There is a block at the foot of page 4 where you will find the main aims of the visitation. And I want to think very carefully about the main aims, because unless we're clear about them and unless the visitors are crystal clear about them, we are not going to be as effective as we might be in the visit. Let's look at the two main aims. One, to examine the vows of membership. This is what we're asking visitors to do, to seek to serve God better in daily life and in the community and in the congregation, and to begin by coming to a special service of commitment. And secondly, to examine their Christian giving, to decide what proportion of their income they will give as their offering, and to make a specific promise to do so. Now, you'll notice that I've suggested 20 minutes for this visit. This is, of course, quite flexible, but it's there to indicate that the call is neither a brief 2 or 3 minutes to deliver literature, nor is it a social call lasting well into the evening. In most cases, 20 to 25 minutes will be adequate to do the two main things we have to do. But, of course, if there's need to go on longer, then we can certainly take the time. Now, the two aims have been carefully chosen to have a balanced emphasis. They meet the misunderstanding that can often arise where some may feel that the only answer is to deal with commitment and the money somehow will follow. At the other end, others may feel that we can deal with finance and get it out of the way, and then get on with the more spiritual matters. The truth is that we need both. We need teaching and we need encouragement to help us renew. And as one aspect of our commitment, we need to take a fresh look at the financial needs of mission and our part in it. I want you now to turn to the centre page of the leaflet, Facts and Action. And at the bottom of the centre pages, you have a diagram showing the main events in the recommended programme. I want to spend a little time with you on this, as it's helpful if your visitors have a grasp right at the beginning of the whole program and not just the visitation itself. Now, one effective way to communicate this is to put a visual aid up on your blackboard. You can have the outline sketched in before the meeting if you like, and if you've any difficulty in getting these boxes right, well, why not use this leader's guide, our notes, as a template to give you your boxes, and then you can fill in the details as you go along. It will be helpful here to, first of all, note the dates of the visitation, and then preceded by the date of the special service before the visit, and then the date of the meeting on commitment following the service. It will be helpful to remind our visitors in advance of all the preparation that has been made for this visit, the dates of delivery of the broadsheet, Life and Work special issue in October, the parish newsletter. All of this preparation helps to remind the visitor that there has been considerable thought and time and planning given to the preparing of the way for this all-important visit. Next, note the date on the diagram of the special service of commitment and its importance not only as the climax of this stage of the program, but the beginning of an emphasis on commitment reaching into the future. And so prepare your diagram outline after you switch the tape off that you will use to focus attention on the main outline of the program. And finally, on this point, aids for the visit. Let's mention to our visitors, as we've suggested in the timetable, all the help that is available. There's the broadsheet, which is one of the keys to an effective visit, the leaflet on Christian giving, the leaflet into the 80s, the leaflet Facts in Action, and the leaflet So You're Going to Be a Visitor. This last one, by the way, I'd suggest you hold until the second meeting, as in it's really a summary of the main points made in the notes of guidance for training visitors.
And that's the end of Band 2. Well, the next point on the timetable is that of commitment. And I've been talking to the Secretary of the Home Board, the Reverend Dr. Ian Doyle, and asked him how he saw the task of the Church.
I see the task as, in the widest sense, continuing the ministry of Jesus. Now, that certainly means, for me at least, a much more outward-looking attitude to the work of the Church than perhaps has been true of us in the past. An outgoing attitude of concern to the world about us, in every sense of that word concern, is how I would see the emphasis needed in the work of the Church for the 80s.
And what personal commitment is going to be needed from individual members to see that aim through?
Well, I'm sure we have to begin right at the heart of the thing with a man's own commitment to Jesus Christ. And if that sounds pious or pietistic, nevertheless, I think we've got to say it quite bluntly. There can be no Christian commitment to the world about us or to any area of life without that first quite personal relationship, if you like, of faith and trust and love towards Jesus Christ. I think we have to begin there, although of course we don't end there. Out of that commitment to Christ, there will come, there ought to come, a real Christian commitment to the whole world about us and to every area of life within it.
That sort of commitment is surely the ultimate in everybody's mind, but how easy is that to achieve when people have family problems, they have troubles at work, they have great pressures, they have uncertainty about redundancy and so on?
I'm sure it's not at all easy. It's maybe the hardest thing in the world. I'm sure that personal commitment to Christ that I've spoken of is not something done once for all, or done in any emotional way. It's an attitude towards Christ that has to be maintained and reconfirmed every day. And out of that will come a truer attitude, which again has to be worked at hard and thought about and reconsidered daily. Attitudes towards the things you've spoken about, like family life and work and so on. But it's not an easy thing. It's something that has to be continually, every day, looked at, reconfirmed, worked over.
And what really can this increased commitment to Christ mean to someone in their life?
I'm sure that the kind of commitment to Christ we've talked about means really a completely new attitude to the whole of life. A sense of fullness of living, a sense of liberation. Not anything narrow or self-centered, the very opposite of that, but a commitment to Christ and a commitment to his world that means, as I've said, a liberation, a new sense of freedom and fullness and purpose in a man's life.
Dr. Ian Doyle and his view of the meaning of commitment. But Bill, how do we get that across to people at the training meeting?
Well, let's consider now the preparation for this session dealing with commitment. The aim of this session is to share with our visitors in as clear a way as we can the reasons why it's urgent and important that all church members should seriously consider their commitment to Jesus Christ and his work. Now, for this particular session on the cassette, you should have to hand your pencil and notebook, the broadsheet into the 80s, and the leaflet into the 80s. You've heard Dr. Doyle giving his comments on commitment and his understanding of it and the depth of it. And you'll find much more information in the leaflet and broadsheet. But the point is, how are you, as a leader, going to pass this on to your own visitors? Now, give a lot of thought to it, because in a way this is the key to the whole program. And unless you can share with your visitors the reasons why we need this emphasis on renewed commitment, Unless we can share something of the urgency and importance of it, then much of the effectiveness of the programme will be lost. Now, I can't present the case for you at your training meetings, and it would be ineffective just to play a recording, no matter how good the recording, but there is a better way, and the most effective way for you to present it to your visitors is in your own words, using your own illustrations. For example, look for a moment at the leaflet Into the 80s. On the front page you'll find the main heading, The Needs of the World, and its 3 subheadings: the world in the 80s, the service of the church, the gifts of God. Now, I'd like you to go through the leaflet in a moment and consider the various headings and subheadings, and let's think of them as a framework for you to prepare your own training meeting. Now remember, if we're holding to the timetable, we've only got 10 minutes to do this. But the idea is to get your framework down and then start to feed into it your own points and illustrations. For example, in the opening paragraph, it indicates some of the needs of Scotland in the 1980s. Well, that's important, but it would make much more impression, I believe, if you could sharpen it up by speaking about the needs of your town or community in the 1980s. So go through the leaflet and consider your framework, and then consider the details that you want to put in. Next, I would suggest that you use the broadsheet in exactly the same way, dealing with the article on commitment. That's the main leading article of the broadsheet. The way that I suggest is that you take your pen or pencil and underline or circle any point or illustration that appeal to you personally. You may, of course, have read both the leaflet and broadsheet before, but you're doing it now with a different purpose. And as you prepare your outline, consider how you might use some simple visual aids at the actual meeting. We have a very short time, 10 minutes roughly, to present this case, and the one way in which you can help your visitors to focus their attention on it and grasp the points quickly is if you could write up your subheadings on the board, or better still, have them written out beforehand and put them up while you speak to the various points. Now, finally, before you switch off the tape, I suggest you go back and listen again to Dr. Doyle's points on commitment. Listen to that, go through the material, and then do your preparation by sketching out an outline of this session.
And that's the end of Band 2. The Reverend George Elliott is Secretary of the Stewardship and Budget Committee and of the Joint Working Party. George Elliott, we've heard Dr. Doyle talk about commitment, but how do we present that practically? Surely it's going to be very difficult for visitors.
We know that it will be difficult for many visitors, and this is why we're presenting it in a very simple way and giving the visitors as much help as we can. For example, there will be an article about Christian commitment in the broadsheet, to which they can refer as they feel they cannot say very much about it themselves. Then the vows of membership will be on the commitment card, and they'll be able to point to this when they're talking with the member. They'll probably also receive help in the training session by talking with one another, and of course ministers could help by preaching on commitment before the visit takes place.
So what exactly are you asking visitors to do about commitment on their visit?
It's very important to be clear about this. We are asking visitors to do 2 things. And the first is to invite members to think about their commitment as this is expressed in the vows of membership. And the second is to invite members to come to a service of commitment. We're not asking visitors to get at members or round up defaulters, nor are we asking a visitor to get into an argument with any member. If the visitor can speak simply from his own experience, they should be encouraged to do this. But we should also assure visitors who would find it difficult to talk about commitment that it will be quite enough if they direct the attention of the member to the article in the broadsheet on commitment, to the vows on a commitment card, and invite them to the special service of commitment.
Why is it that you're using the vows of church membership? Isn't Christian commitment not just commitment to Christ?
It is. But we're using the vows because this is how members first openly expressed their commitment to Jesus Christ. And the vows also serve to spell out the meaning of commitment in simple ways for ordinary members.
Are you expecting the visitors to find out from the members how they intend to respond to that?
No, the visitor is not there to carry out an inquisition. The method of responding is a very personal one between members and Jesus Christ. But of course many members may want to have the opportunity to reaffirm their commitment with other members, and this is why we attach great importance to a well-arranged and effective service of commitment.
But what about those members who've lost their faith or perhaps become unsure?
This will certainly be the position of some members, although of course not all of them will say so openly. If they do, the visitor should accept their sincerity and ask whether the member would perhaps like to talk personally with the minister. Or the visitor might mention that teaching is going to be given in services following the service of commitment, which they would find helpful. Or they might confess that they themselves are like the Father who said to Jesus, "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief," and that many Christians follow Jesus, knowing that their faith is not perfect.
But what about those members who say that they've already made their vows and they don't need to reaffirm them?
Well, if members feel strongly on this point, visitors should not press them about it. But if they can, they might say why they themselves want to take the opportunity to reaffirm their vows. It's been well said that commitment to Jesus Christ is not the act of a day, but the work of a lifetime, and that giving ourselves to Jesus Christ is something that's never finished, but always to be reaffirmed. And many will see the reaffirmation of vows in this way.
Reverend George Eliot. Well, that deals with commitment. So if you'd like to switch off for a short while and think about the opportunity for response that you can offer. When you come back, we'll talk about giving. That's the end of Band 4. Next on the timetable is giving. And the committee charged with the task of trying to raise much of the income of the church is the Stewardship and Budget Committee. Its convener, the Reverend Hugh Wiley, has a deep conviction that giving and commitment are inseparable.
The task that I see ahead of the church in the 80s centres around two areas. First of all, providing an adequate centre for worship, and then secondly, providing a base for mission and for outreach. Now, a centre of worship requires buildings and staff, and mission, whether it's at home or overseas, again requires staff and trained leaders and program. Now, buildings mean that they have to be properly maintained. Staff, this means they have to be adequately provided for to concentrate their efforts fully on the task at hand. And then programs have to be thoroughly researched and prepared. And this is all outlined in the leaflet into the 80s, and all of this requires money. Money to pay for repairs and upkeep of buildings, to provide salaries, to provide the care and support for more and more people in need, to pay for the proclamation of the gospel of love. Now, Jesus spoke frequently and frankly about money. About a sixth of what he said in the New Testament deals with the right use of money. It's the currency of expressing our gratitude to God. It's the currency of giving service to others and of extending Christ's church and kingdom. For all of us, the giving of money is an essential part of what it means to be a Christian. And here today we have two problems facing us. First of all, the problem of inflation. And it is where the leaflet Facts in Action will give you very particular details about this. Take petrol and travel. Take your electricity bill. Take the repairs to your home. Then add on that. All of these are essential areas. And yet they're increasingly expensive. Now, take your own congregation. The cost of heating and lighting and repairs. What did it cost to keep your church open for a week last year? How much will it keep your church open for the same week this year? In 1978, we required nationally £18 million for the church's work. Now, to do exactly that same work in 1981 will require at least £27.5 million. That's in 3 years. We have to have a 50% increase in our income. Now, has your offering been revised to cover inflation so that it is providing for what it ought to be providing? That's the first area of concern, to see if your offering is taking account of inflation. If the 50 pence you gave in 78, is it now pounds that you gave in 78? Now at least £4.50. The second area of concern is seeing that what is given is being given from the right base in the first instance. Why do you give what you do in your offering? On what principles have you based it? Now, the Bible is crystal clear on this point. You see, in the Old Testament, it tells us that there the members of the church gave at least a tithe. That was a fixed proportion, a thought-out percentage of their income. And it was given regularly, it was given joyfully, and it was given sacrificially. Now, when you go to the New Testament, you'll find the same principle. There was a fixed proportion given, a percentage of their income. That was their base, and it was given regularly and joyfully and sacrificially. Now, this is the question that every one of us as members of the church has to look at. Is our offering a thought-out and fitting proportion of what we've been given? For example, if your net take-home pay is £70 a week and you wish to give a thought-out proportion of 2.5%, that's an offering of £1.75. Look at the leaflet, Christian Giving, and there you'll find set out the details of the right principle to use for giving and the right application of that principle to your own personal income. If our members can be helped to get the base right and then inflation-proof it by constantly revising it in the light of their income and pay awards, we'll be able to provide a centre for worship. We'll be able to provide a base for mission. There's a great potential not realized. Now, don't leave it to others. Look at what you do yourself.
The Reverend Hugh Wiley. Well, once again, Bill Law, how do you put across that very concise and very convincing case to visitors?
Well, difficult for a start to follow that. But I think preparation is the key to it. And I'm going to suggest in a moment that, and again addressing myself to our congregational leaders, that you play that over not once but a number of times for two reasons. One, to take it to heart personally, and the other, of course, to look at the various points that are being so sharply and crisply made. Now, before we go on with a little more preparation on this point of increased giving, you will need to hand the following material: the Christian Giving leaflet that Hugh Wiley referred to, the Facts and Action leaflet, again the broadsheet, and also this time the financial summary form that was sent out to treasurers and I hope you have completed. Now, just as with the preparation for presenting the case for commitment, I suggest that you go through this literature, pencil in hand, underscoring, circling any points that appeal. You may, for example, wish to use the framework of the leaflet, Facts and Action, as your shape to your presentation. Just look at the framework it has. Point number 1 that the leaflet makes is that giving is the heart of the Christian faith. Point number 2, that the work of the church needs money. Point number 3, the need is urgent. And point number 4, members could give more. Now, on the first point, the leaflet that the Reverend Hugh Wiley referred to, Christian Giving, will provide much useful material for you to shape up something here. The points that it's making is why we give, how much we give, and what it's for. On the second point, the work of the church needing money, well, Facts and Action have the points laid out. On number 3, again, there's a comparison of the income last year and the budget this year, and this should bring out the point. And finally, on the fourth point, members could give more, or the potential for giving in your congregation. It's important that your visitors realize the tremendous potential that there really is. The financial analysis sheet is necessary, and you should refer to the leader's notes to see how you can interpret this pattern of giving. Now, before switching off, just a word about presenting this at the training meeting. For this session, even if at no other point in your training program, there's a clear place for visual aids. Many people have difficulty in grasping quickly proportions and percentages. Now, you have in the leaflet Facts and Action 2 diagrams, one on income and one on the budget. Try working out similar diagrams for your own congregation. Remember, however, that when you're preparing your pie chart, that the amounts given for the maintenance of the ministry fund are only that given beyond the congregation. In other words, your minister's stipend is part of the local expenses of the congregation. Remember, too, when you're preparing your diagrams, to err on the side of making them too large rather than too small. Even for a comparatively small meeting, I would want to draw a pie about 18 inches across or 9 inches in diameter. Now, looking for a moment at the financial summary form and the side heading Analysis of Giving. If the figures have been completed, they provide a picture of the pattern of giving in your congregation. And the 2 points that perhaps you would consider are the number of members in the weekly free will offering scheme giving less than 30 pence a week, and the number of deeds of covenant less than £30 a year. Now, the pattern of giving shown by the analysis enables you to make the point strongly that there is this considerable potential for increased giving within the membership of your congregation. And if you haven't completed your analysis, perhaps I could refer you to the 2 examples in the leader's notes. Example A looks at giving by deed of covenant in weekly terms. Now, while accepting that this kind of analysis is only a very rough guide to the pattern of giving, you can work out the position for your own congregation. If you take those giving, say, between 20 and 30 pounds per year, and translate it into weekly terms, it means that somewhere between 38 and 58 pence a week is the figure being given by people with a deed of covenant at this level. Now, if you regard this as the giving of 2 members, which it is in many cases, that means we're talking about giving through deeds of covenant in a good number of cases between 19 pence and 29 pence per member. Now, when you reflect back on what Hugh Wiley was saying in the last part of the cassette, it shows that there is a considerable potential here for giving. And example B simply shows the need for regular review, showing the way in which inflation has eroded the real value of our giving. You can see from this that even if a deed of covenant was taken out only last year, it could already be 20% less in value. Why not stop at this point now and prepare your rough outline of your notes and the diagrams that you hope to use? And I would suggest before you start that you go back again and listen to the Reverend Hugh Wiley with his remarks on giving. Now, coming back to the opportunity for response, if you turn to the promise card, you'll note that the bottom section includes the financial response. This is based on the card that has been used for many years as part of the Give As You Earn program. It is intended that the financial promise should be separated from the main part of the card, leaving the member with the other 2 sections. The financial part can then be sealed in the envelope provided, and this is addressed to the treasurer. There is also the opportunity provided in the card to indicate an interest in deeds of covenant. So visitors should be given a copy of the promise card at the end of the meeting to consider their own promise. And the main point, really, of the whole exercise is to stress that, as Hugh Wiley said, giving should be in proportion to what we receive.
Thanks, Bill. So to sum up this side of the cassette, we've outlined the aims of the programme, we've talked about the timetable, and about commitment and giving. In other words, why we should visit and what we should talk about when we go. Well, that's side 1. So wind the cassette on to the end of this side, turn over, and we'll see you in side 2. Hello again and welcome back. I hope you can remember that side 1 of this cassette dealt with the aims of the Into the 80s programme, why we should visit, and what would be involved in that visit. This side deals with the mechanics of visitation, and after we've finished, it's to be hoped that you'll be able to present the 4 main points in the technique of visiting. That's the end of band 1. Well, here's Bill Law to talk about what to do at the door, in the home, and before you leave the home. Bill.
Thanks, Ian. Now, this side of the cassette is mainly intended to prepare for the second training meeting, and you should, after working through this side of the cassette, be able to prepare your own visitors for these various points that Ian Gall has just mentioned. The literature that you should have to hand in order to work through this side of the cassette is the Leader's Notes Part 2, your notebook, the leaflet into the 80s, the leaflet So You're Going to Be a Visitor, the broadsheet, and the commitment card. Now, if this material is not to hand, you better stop the tape now and find it before opening your Leader's Notes at page 9. The teaching will divide into 4 main sections: what to do at the door, what to do in the home, what to do before leaving, and what to do before the visit. Now, as you prepare for this meeting, I would again stress the importance of everybody knowing what's involved and what we're trying to do. To act as a reminder, consider beginning by a brief restatement of the aims of the programme and the aims of the visitation. And then, as at the first meeting, tell the visitors what you're aiming to deal with in this meeting. That's the learning objectives which are set out in the notes. But a word about method. This meeting can be dealt with in a number of ways. It's often dealt with simply as a number of talks where we could tell the visitors what they should know. But there's a better way for the purpose of this meeting. The most effective way is to involve them, not just tell them. And the following method is simple to use and effective. Begin by asking your visitors what problems they anticipate meeting or what concerns they have about going out visiting. Now, these should be noted on the board in as few words as possible. Now, don't try at this stage to answer, to approve, to condemn, or in any way evaluate the points. Simply note them. And the points that come up are usually the what-ifs. What if I don't get in? What if the television is on? What if it's a good church member? What if the wife is a member and the husband's not? What if they don't complete the promise card? And so on. These are the main ones that tend to come up. But you can next put them into categories or groups of questions, and you can do this by numbering them or by underlining them in colour. You'll find that with a few exceptions, they fall into one or other of the 4 categories that we're dealing with. And if you have done this, you're now in a position to discuss them one by one and involve the visitors in providing the points that they are mainly concerned about. This method is helpful not only as a technique to help the visitors to see the need for preparation, which is the main point of it, but it also allows them to express indirectly any fears that they may have about the visit. And while visitors often do have fears, and we should recognise this, they're almost always quite unfounded. A valuable part of the exercise is that almost every point raised, you will find, has its answer in adequate preparation. Now, before studying the Leader's Guide where each of the main points are considered, stop the cassette and do a little preparation yourself. Why not list on the paper the concerns or fears that you think might be in the minds of your visitors, or indeed you may have in your own mind? And if you're listening to this cassette together with your small committee, well, let each one in the committee do the same. Let's note the concerns that we might have about this visitation that's coming. So switch off now. Well, welcome back. If you've completed the list of points, let's consider them under the 4 main headings, beginning with what to do at the door. Now, this visit is far too important to discuss on the doorstep. Every effort should be made to discuss it in the home with the member. On the doorstep, it's not really possible to have a meaningful discussion about things that are important as our commitment to Jesus Christ. Now, the member doesn't invite the visitor in often because he or she knows the visitor has a number of calls to make. The visitor doesn't get in because they're not invited in. Well, look, let's clear up this misunderstanding. Where it's inconvenient at the time for the member to have the visitor in, this can be brought to the surface by 4 important words. May I come in?
These provide the opportunity to arrange a time when it would be convenient. Now, another important point at the door is the visitor's expectations. Now, we know from a lot of experience that visitors often approach this job with a low level of expectancy. They don't expect to be made welcome. They don't expect to be invited in. They don't expect great things could happen. So let's encourage our visitors to approach every home with a high level of expectancy. And again, I would suggest that you now stop the tape for a moment and consider the form of words that you would use as the door is opened if you were out visiting. I suggest you write them out before switching on again, because it's an important part of the preparation, and you might consider two kinds of introduction that you might want to make. One to a member that knows you very, very well, and the other to somebody who may know you by sight, or you may know by sight, but you're not really all that well known to them. So switch off now. Let's consider now any points that have been listed or problems that have been raised under in the home. This visit in some ways is much easier than we sometimes undertake in the church, because the aims are quite clear. Refer to your leader's notes again and remind yourself of the guidelines if you're not certain about them. Let's repeat these objectives to our visitors. As the visitor understands clearly what they have to do, if they do that, they're well on the way to a successful visit. But how do you measure success? Well, certainly not in the terms of whether or not or to what extent there is a response on the part of the member. The success of the visit can be measured by the extent to which a visitor provides the opportunities listed in the objectives of the visit. Now, let's go over that one again. The success of the visit can be measured by the extent to which a visitor provides the opportunities listed. In other words, the opportunities to consider commitment, the opportunities to make a financial response. Now, it's important to get that measure of success across. It gives confidence that we're not being judged by the quality of the response. Now, one of the difficulties that visitors often have is how to introduce the subject in the home, and they will need some help in this. Now, the following suggestions might help. Consider the broadsheet Into the 80s as the key to it. Suggest that the visitor read it carefully, noting any points that appeal, especially in the leading article on commitment. And a reference to this article in the broadsheet is a good way of getting into the subject. At the very least, even reading from the article on the back of the broadsheet on what a member expects the visitor to do and what the visitor should expect of the member, this can be a light-hearted way of getting into the main point of the visit. The bold headlines in the broadsheet can also help to make points clear, as even if the members are sitting at the other side of the fireplace, the headings should be able to be read. Now, this is a good time to stop the cassette and read the broadsheet with this in mind and consider how you would introduce the subject to a member, because it helps so much when you're training visitors to give them an example of how you would deal with it. The broadsheet can also be used to introduce the financial emphasis. Provide your visitors with your congregational financial requirements so that the national needs presented in the broadsheet can be used to introduce the local needs. The broadsheet also prepares the way for the promise card, as the member should have had time to consider the card before the visitor calls. And the broadsheet is also a useful way of coming back to the point when inevitably in many visits we drift on to other things. They can be brought back by saying, well, let's remember that this is what we are supposed to be talking about in this visit. Point out to your visitors that the promise card is discussed and then offered to the member, not the other way round. The financial promise should be torn or cut from the main part of the card, completed by the member, sealed in the envelope. The rest should be completed with the date of the special service, and I would be inclined to suggest that this be done in the home rather than the visitor writing them all out beforehand. If it's done in the home, it's an added reminder to the member of the date of this important service of commitment. Now, I suggest that you stop the cassette again and read over each section of the commitment card, and why not go through yourself or with your committee the actions of dealing with the card at the end of the visit. In other words, refer to the card. Tear off the lower part. Pass it to your imaginary member together with the envelope addressed to the treasurer. Write in the date of your special commitment service on the invitation card and set the card up on the table beside you. That simple demonstration would help your visitors to see what is expected of them in the home. And remember, when the financial card is completed, the visitor should take the card in its envelope away with him or her at the end of the visit. Let's consider now what to do before leaving. Well, this shouldn't be difficult, surely. And yet, some people find that this is really a problem. It's a little like speaking in public. Some speakers go on forever talking because they haven't worked out the end of their speech. Well, the simple answer lies in preparing the closing remarks before the first visit is ever made. And one way that can help your visitors is, again, to suggest that they use the broadsheet. Why not, when the card is completed and received back, reading out from the broadsheet or referring to the article on the purpose of the visit, saying, these are the things that we came to do, and these are the things that have been completed. Now, the final point of the four that we mentioned at the beginning of the cassette, what to do before visiting, the preparation. Well, having prepared to deal with your three main points in the meeting, there's really not a lot more to be said about preparation, as the need for it should have come clear at every stage. You will see that this leaflet that I referred to earlier on, so you're going to be a visitor, summarizes all the points that we have been discussing in the cassette on how to make a visit. So look at that carefully, because you'll be giving it to your visitors at the end of the meeting, and you will see that this summarizes all the points that we have been discussing in how to make a visit. I would read the notes again on preparation, and perhaps take especially to heart the point on prayer as it relates to your work as a leader and the visitors that you're going to train, because just as a visitor can feel quite inadequate until they realize that they're not going in their own strength alone, so as leaders, unless we can draw on the power that is made available for God's work, we will not only feel inadequate, we of course will be inadequate. So stop the tape now and read through the leaflet, so you're going to be a visitor.
That's the end of Band 2. Well, as Bill was saying, visitors will almost certainly be asked questions and possibly even criticised during a visit. So I've been talking to Will Farrell and Willie Mackay, members of Stewardship and Budget's field staff, and asked them the sort of questions the visitor can expect in a home. For example, a very basic one: how does a deed of covenant work?
I don't think the visitors should worry about that. I think they should know basically how it works, and be so that they're able to say to people, there is no trouble, there is no worry, there's very little form filling. If you simply continue to give your offering or part of that offering and sign a deed of covenant, then the congregation can benefit from the tax reclaimed. So the member doesn't have to worry. The office bearers will do the work.
Willie Mackay, what about the one, it's an old chestnut really, where people say we ought to be putting our own church in order? In other words, why do we send so much money overseas?
Well, this does come up quite a bit in most congregations. But I think we have to put this into perspective. We have to ask ourselves, really, how much money are we spending overseas today? There's a lot of misunderstanding about this. Some members of congregations feel that they are giving a lot of money to work overseas, and this is just not true. But I have always found the best way to answer that question is to find out how much the congregation gave to mission and service last year, and then to break that figure down to a per capita figure for that congregation.
When that is done, you get things into perspective, and people begin to realize that perhaps the sum of money that they are thinking about is something like £1.50 per member per year, and half of that, less than half of that, being used for work overseas.
With the church at home, Will, is it a good idea before you go visiting to have with you facts and figures? So if somebody says, what does our church do with its money anyway, you can come up with the answer.
Yes, I think you've got to know how it's spent, and I think that's the operative word, that the money is spent. A lot of members, I think, feel that money is stored away by their treasurer in their own bank or by the Church of Scotland in Edinburgh, that the cellars there are stacked to the ceiling with money. Well, having been through the cellars, I know that's not so. I think, too, the visitor should only have a broad picture rather than a detailed account, because accounts tend to frighten people and tend to put the visitor into a very straitened position, that they're trying to explain accounts. I think if they know the broad expenditure for the ministry, for their own local mission, and for the work elsewhere in, for example, mission and service, these three major figures would be enough to explain what happens to the money.
Now, what about the commitment aspect of this visitation? There are those who will feel perhaps reticent about signing a piece of paper, filling in a form, and say that surely this is a personal commitment between me and God. I don't actually have to sign a piece of paper.
Well, I think that's true. When we joined the church, we didn't promise to fill in a piece of paper or sign our commitment. It was an undertaking in faith. But I think the truth is, and we've got to face this, that the standard of commitment in the Church of Scotland is so low today that it appears, to me at any rate, in the work that I do, that the majority of our people are not bringing God into the calculations at all. If we did take God into our commitment, then there would be no need in the church today for the kind of program that we are having. If we were all perfect Christians, the commitment would be there, and the church would have all the money that it needed, and people would be willingly giving their time and their talents for the ongoing work of the kingdom. But that's not so today, so we must face up to it, that we need to help our people to make a fresh commitment, and I am absolutely convinced that a promise card is a big help to many of our folk.
Yes, I think that what a promise, or a promise card, if we call it that, does is it shows the importance that the church and the office bearers are placing on this particular aspect or these aspects of commitment. And it helps the member make a commitment. Good intentions are always there, but it's a crutch to help us keep these good intentions.
But we live in uncertain times, and there are those who would, again, feel unwilling about committing themselves to a certain amount of money when they might say, well, I could lose my job, or redundancies round the corner, or so on.
Well, that's right. I think we have to be very practical here. But on the other hand, what Christian is uncertain about his or her eventual future? And I think this links in with the fact that too often we don't give God enough credit. We are not believing enough the kind of things he is saying to us. And I think that if a member normally looks back over a period of years, even when things were tough, when were they ever so low as to be unable to give some kind of offering? And this is the value of this kind of visit, that it allows the member to take into account all the circumstances. And if these circumstances change before the next visit, then they can quite readily and easily and without guilt change their mind and lower or raise their giving.
Willie, what do we do when we go to a home and meet a direct criticism of the minister, say of that congregation, or of a couple of the elders, and this member is really quite upset about the way they behave or something they did or didn't do in the past? How does the visitor deal with that one?
Face it squarely and try to answer it honestly. I think it would be quite wrong to give the impression that our ministers are a perfect breed of people. They are like us, human beings with all our failings. And I think that the best thing that a visitor can do in a case like that is to say, fine, I'll take a note of what you're saying, but we must realize that the church is made up of people like ourselves with all our faults and failings. And the gospel of Jesus Christ is about reconciliation, coming to terms with one another, forgiving one another, and building up the fellowship so that we can go on being a force in the world for good. And so there is a need for every member of the church to consider this whole question of forgiveness. If we want God to forgive us, then the first step in that is learning to forgive other people. We have to go out visiting, expecting criticism, but not to be overcome by it.
Yes, I think the fact is we should be honest in everything we do as a visitor. We should be ourselves and not seem to try to sell some party line. What we're really sharing with people are our own thoughts, our own commitment, and if that's the way we feel, we should say so. But overall, I think we're quite clear that we have a positive aim and that we shouldn't be apologetic in presenting that aim and trying to get a response from the member.
How do you get across to some people the question of priorities? You know, the one somebody says, well, I'm too busy for church. I get along when I can, but I've got family commitments and my job takes me away and so on.
Well, I think people have to be challenged to think about the priority. Different people will respond in different ways, and I think we must admit that some people's priority should lie out with the normal congregational structure in terms of their service to the community, for example, or in their work. But they must always be part of that community if they're going to be realistic in presenting the good news. And I think we have to keep before members the challenge that Jesus made, rather than necessarily the plans the Kirk session have. The two aren't always synonymous. So I think I would want people to see the challenge in real terms, and part of the problem in the church often is we are apologetic. We don't present a real challenge. We ask people to attend or to listen, but seldom to do and to be realistically involved and to take time and energy and effort to do something. People will respond when they see that it's necessary, and I would agree with those who say that their time is far too valuable to come just for half an hour on a Thursday, because that's often the way the challenge is presented.
Whilst it's very important for visitors to be prepared for the awkward questions, the sort of things we've been talking about, it might be unwise for them to go along on the defensive, really. So what do they do when they go to a home where there is a couple who are very, very good members, and they might actually say to you, but what else can I do? What more do you want from me?
There is a limit to the time that individuals can give to activities within the church, and I have always recognised this. And so it's just a question of talking things out with people and helping them to see that we are not asking them to give every hour that God gives them to church activities. That might well be a soul-destroying thing. I think that we have to take some of the freedom that comes from Christ and live out our lives in the strength that comes from beyond. And if we do that, then we will be giving ourselves in the work in a natural way. There is, I think, a misunderstanding about what we mean by commitment in the church. To some people it does mean being a member of a committee, part of the organisations of the church, and nothing else. If that's what it is, then the church will fail. The real need in the world today is for members of the church to be the church in their daily lives.
Yes, I think this type of visit is probably the most difficult for a visitor, because you're going to have to answer questions and queries and meet aggressive people, and they can be completely thrown when the people in the home agree with everything that's said and go further and ask what might more be expected of them. I think here the idea is that we talk with the members rather than tell them what we want. We discuss matters. But at the end of the day, I think the visitor's task is to offer to the member the church's thinking and plan, the congregation's outlook for the next weeks or months, and ask if they want to be involved and to explain how they might be involved, and discuss it from that point of view, rather than going in and saying, here is our plan, sign the dotted line where I've marked, but to discuss together how they might be involved in the kind of plan the church has mapped out. It may be that these members quite often can suggest improvements or ideas that can be taken back. So the visitor should be prepared to learn as well as to share with them the thinking of the session or the congregation.
William Mackay and Will Farrell. Bill Law, we've heard a great deal about commitment and giving, the technique of visitation and so on. For many people listening, it'll look like a very daunting task ahead, putting all this across to the visitors. Is it going to be that difficult?
Well, it depends how you look at it. Daunting, I would rather say it's a big and an important and an urgent task. But from my total experience, I would imagine that we could have a lot of confident visitors if they recognise two things. First of all, that 90% probably of the effectiveness of any visit takes place before the first door is ever knocked. In other words, the preparation in the visitor's own home before he goes out visiting. Now that's at the purely practical level. I think the second thing has to do with our whole attitude towards the programme. The realisation that we're not going in our own strength alone. But I'd like to come back to this one on our attitude, because it seems to me that the task is not daunting if we recognise that our attitude is one of humility, where we're going out not with someone who has all the answers, but rather someone who's simply feeling their way forward with a conviction that we should be more effective in our Christian witness and in our depth of commitment. I suppose it centres round, for many visitors, the question of who am I to go and visit somebody else? And that's a pretty big biblical question. You know, the Moses asking, who am I to go unto the Pharaoh? Or Jonah saying, who am I to go to the city of Nineveh? But I believe that if we reflect back on what George Eliot said right at the beginning of the other side of the tape, that this visit is not a means of getting at people or sorting them out or disciplining them. It's a case of recognising how far we fall short ourselves in our own commitment and our own activities, going in humility to share our thoughts with other people. I also remember, I think it was D.T. Niles who once said that sharing the gospel was like one beggar telling another beggar where to find food. Well, that's me. I don't know all the answers, but I have a conviction that there's an important work for the church to do, and the only way is for us to share our convictions about this and look for answers together.
Well, thanks to Bill Law talking about the preparation and the task ahead. And that's the end of Band 3. Well, for a final summing up of the Into the 80s programme, here's the Reverend George Eliot again.
All that we have heard on this cassette will involve a great deal of work for you who are the leaders, and perhaps even difficulty and disappointment. Why then should we take this on? There are two reasons. First, we believe in God through Jesus Christ, and we believe that God is working out a great purpose in the world through him, and he calls us to take part. Second, we know that although the years ahead may be troubled and critical, the world will be better and life will be better if the nations learn to do God's will and men and women follow Jesus Christ. This then must begin with ourselves. We need to turn to God. We need to commit ourselves anew to Jesus Christ. We need to remind and encourage one another and give our support for the work of the church in the world. Now, this is what the program of action is all about. This is the purpose and point of the preparation, the visiting, the service of commitment, learning about commitment to Christ and living it out in daily life, and preparing to take part with others in outreach. These are things which every congregation and every member can help to do. There are advantages in a program for action. It is better to take action than to do nothing. It is better to have a program in which we work with others than to leave congregations just to go it alone. But there are also limitations. Let us remember, all this is only a beginning. And let us remember even more that we can do nothing without God's guidance and God's help.
The Reverend George Eliot. Well, there we are. My thanks to those who've worked to produce this cassette, and to you for staying with us. We hope you've found it useful, and please don't forget that you can replay it, or parts of it, whenever you want. Thank you for listening.